80s. So we haven't figured it out. Are we finally going to stay warm here yet, or do we have a few more cold snaps in us? I don't know. I don't know if I can take it. Well, many years ago, there was a movie, and it was a movie about the Manhattan Project, which was part of, it was chronicling the development of the atomic bomb that was used during World War II in the nation of Japan. And in this movie, one of the characters is Oppenheimer. Many of you are familiar with. He helped develop the atomic bomb, and one of his colleagues confronts him. And this colleague, Richard Schoenfeld, says, "Hey, Oppenheimer, you ought to stop playing God because you're no good at it and the position is taken." You guys ever heard that quote? He kind of yells it at him. He's passionate, he's angry. Maybe you're familiar with that. Well, Schoenfeld was objecting to Oppenheimer's pursuit of the destructive power of an atomic bomb, which would allow him to make godlike decisions in the nations of our world about the life and death of hundreds, thousands of people. It was Oppenheimer's apparently cavalier attitude towards such serious matters that led Schoenfeld to declare that he was no good at the position of playing God. And in fact, that position was already occupied by God himself. And it brings up in me, as I think about that accusation and that quote from that movie, the temptation in all of us to play God, maybe in smaller areas than the subject of atomic weaponry. There's always this temptation to play little g God, not just in our lives, but in the lives of others. You notice that? Adam and the woman succumbed to this temptation. That was the deal. A couple of weeks ago, we noticed how then friendship with the world, what is truly a pursuit of self-interest, leads us away from submission to and the influence of God in our lives. And that's kind of what was going on with Adam and the woman at that time. They said, we like the idea of being God. We like being the ones who get to decide who makes the call about certain things. And we do that in our lives. We do it when we become friends with the world. We say, I think I could do a better job. And indeed, our culture says that we can. And so we buy into that lie that our cultural stuff that's going on around us, the criteria for success, the happiness, the ease, and the comfort, that's the way to go. And so we chase that. And we saw then how this wrong allegiance to the world, leads to self-centered and divisive behavior, which leads to disunity in our church. Then last week we talked about how the commands and the promises of God reveal and meet our deepest needs as human beings. And because of this, there is not in our doing our own thing that really meets our needs, but satisfaction is instead found in Jesus Christ and in God. And when that's the case, gone is the need in our lives to extract things from others, to fight people, to manipulate, to get our way, and to, in some cases, even abuse them. We find ourselves free of that when we realize that it is God who meets our needs and we are not responsible to meet them on our own and do so in our own way. Ultimately, this demonstrates a lack of humility, but by a desire to lift ourselves up. And Larry quoted a verse earlier today. We've quoted it a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. We've said it really is not our job to pursue exaltation. Exaltation comes when we humble ourselves before God and our brothers and sisters, and God does the work of exalting us. Well, James now moves to discuss another way in which our lack of allegiance to God appears in our behavior with one another. Again, it comes because of arrogance and a lack of humility, and it's revealed by our relationship, this time not to the world, but to our relationship to the law of God, interestingly enough. And this one is particularly dangerous because it takes the revelation of God, of His own holiness, and His desires for us, something designed for our good, something that should humble us, and it twists it. And it even weaponizes it against those that are closest to us. Let's look at James. If you got a Bible, we're in James 4, 11, and 12 this morning. It's going to be on the screen for you as well. James continues in this subject. He says, "Do not speak evil of one another, brothers and sisters. The brother who speaks evil or judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, and you're not a keeper of the law, but a judge, there's only one lawgiver and judge. He is able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor?" It's a good question. And so what we want to say this morning is that arrogance, lack of humility, reveals our allegiance. Arrogance reveals our allegiance, and it reveals that our allegiance is not, in fact, to God or even to the law. It is to self. And James works this problem in three ways that I see this morning. We can sum it up with a heart posture that reveals a problem, and the problem is a problem of pride. Right back to Adam and Eve in the garden. Runs counter to the humility that James talks about in 4:10, where we are to lay ourselves low or allow ourselves to be brought low, recognizing that it is God in His time and in His way who will bring exaltation. Not through seeking it for ourselves, but allowing God to do it. And so first thing, friends, if you're following along in your notes this morning, is the action and the posture of the heart. The action and the posture of the heart. And we're going to look at the two bookend verses here, verse 4:11 and 4:12. He says, "Do not speak evil of one another, brothers." There's the command. And then at the end, he asks the question, "But who are you to judge your neighbor?" These two portions frame the picture James is painting for us. And taking these bookends of our passage, we see a command followed by a rhetorical question. Now, to speak evil is to speak degradingly of a brother or a sister. It's to defame them. It's to slander them. Same kind of thing we talked about last week. And it's not hard to find this kind of stuff going on in our world. It's like 90% of the internet, right? You post something on the internet, something kind, something whatever, encouraging, and people find a way to tear you apart for the most benign and innocent kind of stuff. James says, you speak evil of one another, brothers. This word for one another is the same used in the context for the one another love that is to mark the disciples of Jesus Christ. And it causes us to pay attention and to one another, but to the world around us. That's what they're looking for. John 13:35, Jesus said, "This is how people are going to know that you follow me, that you're disciples of me, that you love one another. If you don't love one another, you're not speaking the truth about my love for you." Now, at the other end of the passage, James asks the question, who are you to judge your neighbor? In other words, who do you think you are, brother? Who do you think you are, sister? And so how are these bookends of our verse related? What's the connection between speaking evil and judging? Are they the same thing? Well, to judge here obviously means to express your opinion, but even more specifically, it speaks of passing an unfavorable judgment. So it's a negative opinion. It's to criticize somebody. It's to find fault with them. It's even to condemn somebody else. And so the context of judgment here is not one of pursuing righteousness or dealing appropriately with sin, with an end to reconciliation. That's not what James is talking about. He's talking about almost a critical spirit that seeks to pull out the worst possible read on a situation. You guys have known people like that, like you do something kind for them, and somehow they twist your motivation, and so you were trying to do something nice, but you were just trying to sucker me, you were trying to manipulate me, and you're thinking, well, I was just trying to do something nice. Well, James is warning against this kind of stuff in the church. He's warning about speaking evil. He's warning about taking the worst take on a brother or a sister. This runs counter to love, which hopes, not advocating for naivety, but love hopes, sees the best in people. And to judge here is to speak evil of one another. It's to assign evil motives to benign or even righteous actions, and we miss it. And this is one of the keys to understanding this verse. And the way James phrases the question is intended to give the impression that to act as a judge in this way is to take up a position against a brother or sister. It's to oppose somebody with evil intent. When even if we were to discover sin and to judge it to be so, we're to lift that person up. We're to pursue unity and reconciliation. We're not here to deck them or push them down or speak evil against them. Let's return to the first part of verse 12. Answer the question, who are you? You see that in there? Who are you? How do you answer? Who are you? Some of us might answer with our career. I'm a pastor. I'm a plumber. Whatever your career is. Some of us might answer that question with our relationships or family connections. If you grew up in a small town like I did, I was Delane's son. I was the pastor's son. You know, for Brandy, they play Dutch bingo over there. Some of you from Michigan are familiar with Dutch bingo. Dutch bingo is you take one person and you figure out how they're connected to somebody else that you know, and you can usually trace it out. My wife can play Dutch bingo like nobody's business. And they have a web of family that like encompasses thousands of people. I had my immediate family, so this was interesting when I married into a large family, how that goes. But some of us define ourselves that way. You know, I'm so-and-so's son. That's my kid, right? Well, even better, even more fundamental to our identity is perhaps, well, I'm Justin, I'm a son of God. I'm a new creation in Christ. That's who I am. And now we look at the whole question, who are you, after we've said who we are, to judge your neighbor. Now that changes things a little bit, doesn't it? What in my answer to the first part of the question gives me the right to degrade, defame, or slander my brother or sister? And James is saying nothing. Nothing about who you are justifies evil, judgmental, unkind behavior. In fact, for a new creation in Christ, this behavior is decidedly inappropriate. And if this is true of us, we've got a hard issue to deal with, James says. You're speaking evil against a brother or sister. And so James invites us then to look closer, and he provides the assessment of the problem. That's the second thing. There's the assessment of the problem. Look at this. The brother who speaks evil of or judges his brother speaks evil of the law. And he judges the law. And then in verse 12 at the beginning, there's only one lawgiver and judge. He's able to save and destroy. Now the real issue starts to come into clearer and clearer focus. Those who would defame and degrade and slander and assume the worst of a brother or sister may have thought that their scope, their crosshairs were trained on a person. I was looking at you. I'm looking at you. Got this to say about you. I got a bone to pick with you. But James says, actually, your scope was trained on the law. You just didn't realize it. You weren't actually shooting a person. You were shooting the law of God. How? How is that true? Well, James says because what we're doing what the law says not to do with regard to our love that is supposed to be displayed for one another. And this is the unintended and short-sighted consequence of elevating ourselves to the wrong position. We may have thought we were just talking about somebody else in church, but the consequences of our words go far beyond that, and it places us in a higher category, again, exalting ourselves. And James says, you've grown arrogant. You've been presumptuous when you spoke that way, when you thought that way. How? Well, it's like you took it upon yourself to speak for God with regard to that other person. And this doesn't only get us in trouble with the law, it gets us in trouble with the lawgiver, James says. So we go back to that. Oppenheimer, you're not God. The position is taken. And James says, There's only one lawgiver, and you're not him. The position is taken. You didn't make the rules. You didn't write the law. And most importantly, you don't possess the power of authority to carry out the consequences of disobedience by yourself, in your own mind, with your own judgment. So here's the problem. The purpose of the law is to reveal God's holiness, and even our lack of holiness by comparison. It's made to compare ourselves to God's law and to adjust and to align accordingly. Not to compare other people to God's law and then beat them up over it. That's not what it's there for. If you do that, you've lost the plot. Not only do you not have access to all of the information that God has with regard to people in our church or in our lives, even if you did, you couldn't adequately reward or punish them. We just don't have that kind of insight, and we don't have that kind of power. And this is a problem in the church, James sees. Those guilty of this have elevated themselves to a position that God is uniquely qualified to fill. And our limitations are illustrated by verses like Jeremiah 17, 9 through 10. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind, to give to every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. And when we act like this, when we speak evil of, when we judge brothers and sisters, we'd ignore verses like this. Or we just apply it to them. We say, well, their heart is wicked. Who can know it? I certainly can't. But I do know this, right? That they are this, or did that, or think this. And we don't read that ours is the heart that is wicked too, don't we? We exempt ourselves from that, and we just put that on somebody else. And James is saying, knock it off. Don't be arrogant like that. Don't exalt yourself to a place of thinking that your heart is perfect and pure and chaste, and everybody else is wicked. Folks, searching hearts is God's job. Only He is capable of it. The Apostle Paul is a great example of how this plays out in the context of a local church. This is in Romans 14, 1 through 4. Some of you are familiar with these verses too. He writes, as for one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. And let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or fails or falls. And he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. And I know this verse has been used to speak out against being a vegetarian. We're not going to go there this morning, okay? That's not what it's about. You see, the problem is many times our judgment of others results from differing opinions on things. We see things differently. Maybe they pertain to matters in how we express our faith. So when we come together, people feel like we should be doing things that we're not, or we shouldn't be doing things that we are doing. That was the problem here at Romans. You had some people that felt very free to eat meat that was sacrificed to idols. No big deal. There's not actually a real idol. It's not a real God. It's just meat, and it's cheap. Okay? Other people felt scandalized by this. Now, how can you eat that meat that was sacrificed to an idol? We're just going to have vegetables, if you don't mind. The problem was, in the midst of this local family, there was a dispute. And people were breaking off relationships because they saw people eating meat. And they couldn't partake of it. Their conscience got on their case. And Paul's saying, look, if that's the deal, don't eat meat. Don't let this is stupid. Don't let this come between you. Right? And in the midst of this, Paul illustrates that love over law, not love over law, but love expressed through law is the way to handle it. The issue for the Romans is that some had a more informed faith. They were philosophically astute. Some other newer brothers and sisters couldn't see a way to do that, and it resulted in them expressing their faith, at least with regard to how they ate, a little bit differently. Now, there was nothing inherently evil in the food that had been sacrificed to idols, but weaker or younger Christians, ill-informed consciences would not let them eat. And Paul says, you know what? By the law you could, but by your love, do not exclude a brother or sister. So instead of putting themselves in positions of judging one another, of speaking evil, either that brother or sister's so dumb, there's nothing in this meat, they could eat that. Or the younger brother or sister, or the newer brother or sister going, they're wicked that they would eat this meat that was sacrificed to an idol. Paul says, live out the law of love. Defer to one another. And God says, you let me be the judge of that. You let me do that. In the end, Paul says, we're not each other's servants in the sense that we owe an account of our lives to one another, even though we are called to serve one another. We are brothers and sisters. We're called to be humble before one another. Second great commandment is to love each other, or consider each other more important than ourselves. We are to be accountable to one another, but we don't answer to one another as we do to God, right? And I don't know about your house, but there's trouble in ours when one of the kids demands an account from another. You guys ever heard this in your house? Maybe you've been part of it in your house when you were growing up. You have an older child who feels like it is their job to mother or to father some of the other kids, and something happens. There's a dispute in your house, and older brother or sister comes in hot, and they're like, hey, what are you doing? You're wrong. You need to knock that off right now. Or they'll provide consequences, sometimes even without mom or dad even knowing. And then mom or dad has to ride into the situation and say, hey, all right, everybody calm down. It's not your job to punish your brother or sister. It's not your job to provide structure or rules for your brothers and sisters. That's mom and dad's job. And in the family of God, it's like God saying, look, guys, I didn't ask you to go out there and create sets of rules for each other in the church and then to judge one another by your own sets of rules. That's my job, okay? The rules are laid out for you. You see, we should love and we should serve one another. But when it comes to accounting for right and wrong, only the parents have the authority of punishment and reward, and that lies with God too. You see, we can punish in areas where God has commanded us. Usually that involves many people, involves pastors, elders, seeking to reconcile a problem in the church. But that only happens in certain specific circumstances and in a certain and specific prescribed way. And thankfully, God has given that to us. But we don't move on our own authority based upon our own rules and our own ideas. We move with His authority based upon His rules and His directions about how we are to function in His church. And God is saying, and James is saying, if you do it in any other way, you are exalting yourself. And what you do is evil, and it's wrong, and it's arrogant. And that ties into our last point. It's the accusation of pride. Right in the middle of our verse, James says, but if you judge the law, you are not a keeper of the law, but a judge. And this is the hinge of the passage, and it's the crux of the matter. If you judge the law by condemning your brother and sister, speaking evil of them, you've moved from law keeper status to law enforcer status or law evaluator status. The problem here, again, is there's just one judge. There's just one lawgiver. And when we sit on the throne of our lives, we got a problem. And that leads us to sit on the throne of some other things too. Of God's law, of one another. It's inappropriate. And James says we're not a keeper of the law, or if we're not a keeper of the law, we're a breaker of the law. You either keep it, you do what it says, or you're a breaker. And judge is not a legitimate role for us when it comes to God's law. Now, Many of you thought maybe when we got started in this subject matter that we were going to talk about Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount, don't judge lest ye be judged. And a lot of people have accused Christians for being judgy and hypocritical. Is that legitimate? How does this tie into our subject? We have to talk about that today. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, this is Matthew 7, 1 through 3, judge not that you not be judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Friends, the problem is not judging. The problem is the way that we're judging. I'm making a judgment not to judge. It's a problem, right? Jesus is saying our judgments need to be fair. They need to be equitable. They need the same standard applied to all, including to us. And if in my judging I am speaking evil of a brother or sister, I'm assuming the worst of them, I'm condemning them, the question falls back on me. Do you want that same standard, that same hypercritical standard, that spirit that tears people down, you want that applied to you? The answer is going to be no, if we're being honest. And make no mistake, God calls us to make judgments. And we do when we declare something to be right or to be wrong. That's a judgment. That's an assessment about something. But we're not called to write off brothers and sisters when their behavior is not biblical, even if it's not biblical. Address sinful behavior, yes, but do so in a biblical and a loving way. Condemn people as worthless because of their behavior? No, we don't do that. You see, our arrogance in this area reveals pride and allegiance to self rather than to God when we think about and when we speak about our brothers and sisters this way. And pride just is not in the camp of God. And friends, with humility, we need to realize that we can't assess other people's hearts, and we have to trust God to do the work that only an all-wise and an all-loving God can do. And this is a hard one because some of us have been hurt and we're a little bit jaded. And so when somebody says or does something maybe that we don't understand, we don't go into assuming the best for them. We assume the worst. We assume that they were coming at us or they were trying to hurt our feelings, or we're not going to let them, just do that, right? And our default position is one of anger. Our default position is one of unforgiveness and impatience. But that runs counter to our judge and lawgiver. And God says he is patient. He's long-suffering. He's gracious. He's meek. He's merciful. That's his default position. And the problem, James says, is that when you go about doing this, you misrepresent God. And you go against the lawgiver and the law. And you go against the judge, the only one who can judge, because he's the only one that sees and knows everything. As we close this morning, I'm going to invite worship team back up here. Friends, in our conversation, I was thinking about this. It's possible to follow the letter of the law of God with great precision. Many people did that. We were talking about this yesterday in men's Bible study, how the Pharisees followed the law, with probably peerless precision. But there was still a problem. They still had completely lost the plot of what they were there to do. A famous professional wrestler once said, "Your role, know it. Your mouth, shut it." It's a little abrupt, but that's good advice. There's way more verses in Psalms and Proverbs about keeping your mouth shut than there is about running it. And friends, our judgment should only support truth and unity for building up the body of Christ. And truly, when it comes to the way that we judge, arrogance reveals our allegiance. And so when our words are hurtful and abusive and divisive, we have a key alarm that should be going off, saying, whoa, I'm off. There's certain things that I say, there's certain things that I do, there's certain things that I think that ought to be a big warning for me when it comes to how I'm treating my brothers and sisters. Well, what can I leave you with? What should we talk about? What's the practical stuff of this? Let me just throw some things your way. Friends, we can judge. We just have to judge the right way. Okay, we got to judge the right way. Judgment should be fair. It should be equitable. Often judging that's right or judgment that's right puts that back on us. So I might be concerned about something in somebody else if I'm not also, maybe even in the same sentence going, oh, but maybe there's sometimes that I've hurt people's feelings and misspoken. Maybe there's sometimes people have misunderstood me. I would have liked the benefit of the doubt. Am I extending those kind of things to a brother or sister? So if we're judging by a different measure than we would want ourselves judged, we have a problem. And we find ourselves under Jesus' scrutiny in the Sermon on the Mount as somebody who is trying to pull the splinter out of somebody else's eye when we've got a log in our own. So just a few things to remember. Judgment takes into account the facts of an issue. If our judgment is merely based on our feelings or our emotions or trying to assign a motivation to someone else, we're in trouble. Okay? And this is hard. We just get in these emotive kind of modes where we're not thinking about anything. We're just reacting. I'm just mad. I'm just hurt. And so I react. And in that reaction is more complication, more hurt, more division. Got to watch out for that. Know the facts. Judgment also takes into account, this is good judgment, also takes into account the nature and the severity of an issue. Friends, sometimes we want to escalate a problem to fit our anger over it. You heard this before when somebody seems very, very upset and they tell you what they're mad about and you're like, okay, is that really what all of this is about? And we're trying to elevate a misunderstanding to the level of a major character flaw or sin issue because we're so mad. And we wouldn't be mad if it wasn't really important and really serious, right? We overreact. So we have to be careful about that. Because if we run with that, it goes back and forth and we have a huge web that somebody has to try to untangle, and then we're sitting in counseling and it's a huge mess. Friends, don't blow things out of proportion. Don't overreact. Seek to understand first. Be honest about how serious an issue is. How about this? Judgment takes love into account. Good judgment, righteous judgment takes love into account. Any judgment we make about any other person should have the aim of love for that person involved. If I'm not loving them, if I'm mad at them, or I've got an issue with them that's keeping me from loving them the way I should probably suspend judgment. You should probably take a seat and chill out. You see, if love isn't present, it's best to just keep quiet. Paul said famously to the Corinthians, if I speak in tongues of men and angels, but I don't have love, I'm a noisy gong and I'm a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and I understand all the mysteries and all the knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I have not love, I'm nothing. If I give away all that I have, if I deliver up my body to be burned, but I have not love, I gain nothing. Friends, if love is not like the key element to this, we've got a problem. That's probably not a righteous judgment. That's probably something we need to be aware of. And it's easy to demand to be understood and refuse to understand. Well, friends, judgment is a challenging thing. God calls us to judge righteously, but that judgment, that righteous judgment, is based upon who He is, His character and nature and His word, not upon my own personal perspective. And so we've got to be humble. We have to allow ourselves to be humbled under God. We have to trust that God is the one who brings judgment ultimately. He's ultimately the one that will deal with sin. And we were talking about this morning in Sunday school class, what are the things that comfort us about Jesus' return in Revelation? And it is that He will set everything right, even though, friends, a lot of things that we see going on around us are not right. We need to trust God. We need not exalt ourselves to a place of lawgiver and judge. We need to let him do that, even as we seek to understand and seek to love one another the way that we should. If we do that, friends, our church will look different. And our community, our neighbors will see that. They'll be encouraged by it. We'll speak honestly and truthfully about the love of Jesus Christ. Would you pray with me? Well, Father, you're good to us. And like a good God, you have not turned us loose on one another,